See my screen?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Yep.
All right. So my biggest engagement to date was with Citibank, and I went ahead and created a keynote speech around this. And this is the deck I've used previously. I've changed it up a little bit, added some content to the last conversations, which were very good. And Rama asked me to focus a little bit on more so on the scheduling aspects of it. So we'll focus on those. If I skip over a slide, it's just not as pertinent. So let me see, how do I get my controls going here? So, my name is Jerry Glasscock. I'll be walking you through this. So Citibank is a highly regulated environment. The particular task was in anti-money laundering. We'll go through the problem statement, the environment, the governance, and the solution, and then I have some bonus material that I like to share if we have time. It's basic statistics on success rates of projects. A little bit about me. So my career is divided quite nicely between the 20th and 21st century. I was in the United States Navy. I was an aviation electronics technician. That served me very well going into the networking world and the hardware world, where then I picked up project management. But some of my other roles before I figured out what I wanted to do is I worked on a crew boat in the Gulf of Mexico in the oil field. I was an iron worker. At college, I was a garbage man. I made coffee, so I'm a coffee snob. But after I got some traction, I got into the network infrastructure side, system administration, and network administration. And this century, I got into professional services. That was my first task, was to turn around a failing professional services unit at a company called Dataflow Alaska. I got into business management, software development, software side when I moved to Austin in 2004. And my career basically was a matter of taking on the next big crisis that somebody had a problem with taking over failing programs, to the point where I took over a program for Citibank, which was by and large the most difficult thing I had ever done in my career. A little bit about anti-money laundering. There are a lot of regulatory bodies that govern anti-money laundering, and it's just money in general. Banking is highly regulated. FinCEN.
Jerry, you have not shared the screen, I suppose. Is that okay? Or
What's that?
No, he's sharing. I can see.
Oh, you can see because I
Can you not see?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we can see it.
Okay, I changed the thing. Sorry. Yeah.
All right. Okay. One of the regulatory bodies is FinCEN, which stands for Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. They're very intrusive. If you don't do what they want, they have means to make you comply, generally through regulatory fines. Another agency is OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets and Controls. They specialize in economic and trade sanctions. Anytime the United States wants to sanction a country, they do it through OFAC, and OFAC is an enforcement body. So if North Korea, Russia, especially lately, they will be censured through OFAC. AML regulations. There are a lot of different laws that go into the regulations. There's the Anti-Money Laundering Control Act of 1986, an act of 1994, Money Laundering and Financial Crime Strategies of 1998, Suppression of Financing and Terrorism Convention in 2002, Intelligence Reform and Terrorism, and the Patriot Act, of course. So as you can understand, this is a highly complex regulatory environment. You think that the PMP is very detailed on how to manage projects. There's also a certification for how to comply with financial crimes. So this is a certification that I also hold in addition to my PMP, and I would say it was just as interesting a test to take as the PMP. Philip, how was that? Sorry, Philip just got his PMP. It's an interesting test to take. Citibank situation. The Federal Reserve Bank determined that Citi was not doing a good job with monitoring credit card transactions. The FRB had been telling the Citibank this for well over a decade. They were losing patience. You do not want the FRB to lose patience with you, because the best estimate that we could come up with is they were preparing a $600 million fine, which is bad enough as it is, but Citi could absorb that, which, as crazy as it sounds, they could. But the bigger problem is reputational risk and damage. Banks need to maintain a positive relationship with the public, otherwise they do not get or retain customers. And we're not just talking everyday customers like you and me, we're talking about big institutions, bringing companies from private to public with IPOs and stock options. There's just a huge world around the reputation of a bank. For instance, Wells Fargo. Do you remember the mortgage and car insurance abuses? They were fined $1 billion in 2018. That's not the largest one. JP Morgan was just fined $200 million because there were two gentlemen who were using a private texting app to conduct business, which is a big no-no. Citibank was just fined in 2020, this year, $400 million for long-standing internal problems, multiple unresolved internal controls. Those internal controls include a less than adequate policies and procedures to manage projects. So I was there from 2015 to 2019, and I will be speaking to that directly. This is the banking world. This is how the regulators and the banks divide the world. There's North America. Latin America is its own world. EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Africa. APAC, of course, is Australia and the entire Asia Pacific world. There are significant cultural differences across these regions of the world. Now, I had wanted to find a good one that included LATAM, because LATAM is very relationship based. If you don't have the relationships, you will have a very difficult time doing business in LATAM. So that's where I focus a lot of my efforts. You do need to build relationships across these, but it's very important in LATAM. Now, if you read through these, you'll see that there's significant differences in how people think and what they consider to be normal. And yes, for instance, in Asia Pacific, your face is very important, and your face is how you present yourself to the world. And if you lose face, if you inadvertently or unintentionally insult someone, they lose face amongst their peers, they lose their power. So that is something to be very careful of. And it can be, you can do it unintentionally. God help you if you do it on purpose, because they do have very long memories. I didn't do that. I did have a minor infraction because of my own ignorance. I'm going to share with you a tool and a source of information of how to identify those differences beforehand, so you don't have to stumble into some of the things that we came in that I had problems with, because it's just a matter of exposure to these cultures. Some of the working style differences, you know, in the North American region, we want it and we want it now, and I'm going to beat you to the finish line. EMEA, they're very methodical. That's why they get 30 days off a year. You know, they are very very rigorous in their methodologies, and they're not in a hurry. They just aren't. I had to deal with a wholly owned subsidiary of Citibank called Bank Handlowy, which was located in Poland. They were trying to continue to operate as an independent bank. They did not feel that they were subject to US regulatory laws, but because Citibank was, they had to slowly come around and develop the processes to be able to comply with US regulations. APAC, very cooperative, very humanistic, again, with the face. Let me be part of this and offer you our perspective. You have to be able to do a round table. Otherwise, you will not get very far with these folks. I wish I had this before I entered into this program. This is the Hofstede Insights. I came across this when I was doing my MBA classes, and Hofstede, and the link is there down below. And it's a fun tool to play around with. It will give you differences in culture, personality, priorities, and the things that are truly important to them. And because of the geopolitics, I just did a quick snapshot of China, Russia, and the United States. So the distance from power you are from authority, that is your authority. So, and you can go ahead and use the resource to get deeper into this, but this would help you if you are going to be doing an international program of any type. Any questions? Any thoughts? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on. This I did know about before entering into Citibank. This is something I do. I try to gauge what level of maturity that the PMO that I'm working with has. This is the Gartner's maturity model for PMOs. Level 1 is basic. That means every single project is a heavy lift and determines it needs a lot of coordination, personal hands-on time with the, and I was the portfolio manager for this, but I had to have hands-on time with the program managers and the project managers. That's level 1. Level 2, a little bit more formalization and established processes and procedures. Level 3, honestly, I have not seen any company past a level 3. I imagine they do exist in extremely routine government programs, but 5, of course, is best of breed. Citibank, because it had multiple PMOs and sometimes competing PMOs, I would put them at roughly a 1.5 as far as established processes, procedures, accepted, being accepted and across the board. Since we had different project management offices across each of the regions, there was some conflict. So it was more of a hands-on exercise in every aspect of the program. Little description of the environment. So the objective for the program or portfolio that I ran, Citibank runs $4 to $5 trillion of transactions every single day. That's transactions from $10 to $10,000. You imagine how many transactions have to be monitored during that time frame. Scope. Every single region of the world, NAM, LATAM, APAC, EMEA, there were countries that do not allow data to come in or out, which is Japan, South Korea, Mexico, which means people had to go travel to these countries to be able to implement the right processes, procedures, and a single standing instance of the solution we eventually came up with. We came up with a total of 142 countries. Over time, a few people fell out, or excuse me, a few countries fell out, such as Venezuela, which Citi divested completely. The organization, I worked in compliance. We also had to deal with regulatory. I had AML Tech, Global Cards Business, Global Cards Technologies, Business Banking, Business General, Business Tech, and then the Financial Intelligence Unit, which determines if a red flag if a transaction is flagged, it goes to the FIU. And this is not the complete list. This is just a good representation of the number of organizations or verticals that were involved. Multiply that across 4 different regions and the standalone countries. So how many people do you think were involved in this program? So I had a team of project managers in each region. I had thousands of participants globally, and I even had activities with EY, Deloitte, and some of the other big 5 consulting companies. My portfolio Gantt chart had 1,600 lines. Now, how do you think it would be? Do you think it would be best to have a single schedule, or would it be better to have each region to have their own program schedule? Well, because of international laws and not being able to share data across regions, everybody had to maintain their own schedule. So that means a lot of meetings worldwide. I would generally start my day at 6 o'clock in the morning and talk to Poland. We would have a regular meeting to make sure that their schedule was still aligned to the schedule that I was maintaining, because I had to report up to the main steering committee, and that would eventually reach the C-levels. And so this was a lot of hands-off work. I'd start with Poland. I would then work with New York. Then I'd work with my teams in Irving because the data centers were here. Then the West Coast, then Malaysia, Hong Kong, Kuala Lumpur, and Hyderabad, because I had assets and resources there, working there as well. This was an extremely heavy lift because we had a maturity model of about a 1.5 in processes. We had to feel our ways through that. Many business units also maintain their own schedules, and oftentimes they didn't feel that they had to participate in making sure that my schedule was up to date. So I had to reach out and develop the relationships required to get them to provide me the information because I had no authority. Yes, I was a portfolio manager. Yes, I was responsible for what ended up to be a $1 billion program, but everybody has their own interests. Let's see here. Moving it one. So I also had steering committees in every region. NAM, of course, was primary, New York office, because they had ultimate control. But I also had to present progress to each of the managing directors. And if you're unfamiliar with the terms, the managing director is right below the C-level. So right below the CIO, CFO, CEO are the managing directors. And there are about 5 levels of managing directors. So presenting to the steering committees in APAC, EMEA, and LATAM. And if they had issues or questions, then I had to go out and find the answers for them to any number of the project and program groups that were involved in the portfolio. In addition, I had to do internal audit reviews with business, information technology, regulatory and compliance, and project management. We were preparing for the Federal Reserve submission. If you're unfamiliar with submissions to the FRB, I'll use an example that I just went through here about a year ago with a Mitsubishi Financial Group. They had made a submission to the OCC, and it was the feedback from the OCC was it was 504 pages of ununderstandable garbage. That was their quote. So I was involved in reorganizing their PMO to be able to provide a submission that would work. So the submission is very important. It depends on whether or not you're going to get fined or not fined, and then be able to conduct business in a manner that is consistent with your reputation. So the cost of this program, it didn't have to be $1 billion. And that is my best estimate because they didn't allow us to track resource costs. They didn't allow us to track contract costs, but I have enough experience where I can billing rates for each of the individuals. And I knew the number of people that were involved, or at least a very good estimate of the number of people who are involved. This was a $1 billion program. I didn't think it needed to take that long or be that complex, but because it was an extremely relationship building exercise to get cooperation, that is what we ended up with. It was 5+ years long. The benefit and how you articulate is we avoided a $600 million fine. But we spent $1 billion. So you do the math. So getting to some of the more interesting things. So the solution was actually a Hadoop big data engine. So we were working with a brand new big data technology, at least brand new for Citi. This was established technology, but brand new to Citi. We did adaptive heuristic system to determine above the line and below the line for detection. And that's what fed the pipeline to the FIU for investigations. Now, I wanted to touch a little bit more on scheduling. As I said, it's a very heavy lift. I had meetings every single week with every single business unit. So we're talking 24 meetings in a given week just to maintain the schedule, not even to maintain risks and issues, which we also had to do. And that all fell because some of my project managers were very good. Some of the program managers were also very good, but by and large, I'd say that most of the people have been institutionalized and they were serving their managing director as opposed to being completely cooperative. The way I overcame this was developing the relationships over time. I bought a bottle of scotch for the director of the AML tech because that is what he liked and he delivered for me. So yeah, it may be a little cheesy, but that's how I did it. And it was well appreciated. I never had problems with him and through the rest of the program. Initially, he pushed back a bit. The first meeting that I had was I gathered about 32 of the business and IT heads into a meeting in New York. And I had never seen such a room of blank faces in all my life because I had been there for 3 months and I couldn't make heads or tails of the program schedule that was the schedule that had been passed on to me. But I did know that there was a critical date that had slipped twice since I was there, and it looked like it was going to slip again. And so I got everybody together and I said, all right, where are we with this deliverable? Because if it slips, we're going to slip day for day every time this slips. And the provider of the data was brand new because they were operating as a singular entity. They thought that they were in charge of the whole thing, but really they were just a contributor to it. So that's the kind of communication that was going on before I arrived. Unfortunately, the gentleman I spoke about earlier, whom I built a relationship with, he says, that is my date. Then the managing director of all of compliance stood up, said something unpleasant, and then he decided to leave the meeting. This was in the first 5 minutes of my day-long or my 2-day-long work session to finally try and hammer out the original schedule. And me being me, I said something funny like, okay, he's gone. You guys ready to talk now? Which broke the ice enough for the conversation to start. So you have to find a way to get the people to talk to you, even in the worst of situations. And this was amongst the most difficult I'd ever encountered. So Lisa, who was the head of the other technology department, said, well, we're in your schedule. I says, no, wait a minute. I've been here 3 months. This is your schedule. So you tell me where this is going to happen, because if history is a judge, I don't think you're going to deliver this piece of data to Raghu. I don't think you're going to do it in 3 months. So you prove to me that you're going to deliver in 3 months, because it's already slipped between, and this is December. And, it's a day for day slip. And their expectations was this was only going to take another year. One of the interesting bits of information that I had to communicate up the chain was that their program, or their effort that they thought was going to take another year, was going to take them another 4.5 years. That was delivering bad news, especially for an FRB consent order. But eventually we worked through with the 30 people in the room. We got at least a start to it. And it continually evolved. It was definitely not waterfall. I would call it wagile or iterative at best, because it constantly needed updating. It needed a lot of care and consideration. And I would not have gotten the information had I not had the relationships built with the department heads. So moving on. So we have a little bit of time, and I'll go through this relatively quickly. So this is a couple in New York. They were arrested for allegedly stealing $4.5 billion in cryptocurrency. If you think that the FRB and the OCC and the other regulatory bodies only care about banks, no, these people are going to be spending quite a bit of time in very small spaces, kind of like being in the Navy. Project management bonus material. What percentage, and this is going out to everybody, what percentage of projects fail by one or more metrics? Anybody want to take a stab at that? You can go ahead and put it in the chat. No takers? There we go. Dennis, there's a realist. Jai, also a realist. Okay, you guys know what you're talking about. Let me see if I can, there we go. 70% of all projects fail by one metric, at least one metric, and most fail by many. If a project program portfolio is encountering problems, odds are it has more than one problem with it. Some of the other interesting statistics, which I got from, there's a bunch of different places I get these kind of statistics from. One is the Standish Group, and there's some great examples in white papers if you want to see why projects fail. One of the easy ones is if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So your schedule is important, and tracking it is very important, because it'll give you an idea of what is about to hit you. Hopefully you can get to it before it hits you, but oftentimes that does not happen depending on the environment you're working in. 42% of companies who don't understand the need or importance of project management. Quick story on that. I asked Citi for $1 million to start to implement Microsoft Project Enterprise so I could coordinate. And rather than me having to have all these meetings and running 16, 18-hour days, so everybody could update their own tasks. So we'd have one portfolio schedule. They said no. I got like, okay, we do it the hard way. That's why it's going to take another year. But they didn't value the real process. They did on paper, but they did in reality. 55% of project managers cite budget overrun as a reason for project failure. Well, a $1 billion program that didn't have to run $1 billion, I'd call that a huge project overrun. I mean, it was a gigantic undertaking, and it was legitimately in the hundreds of millions of dollars, but I don't think we had to go quite that far. Little plug for the PMI industry. Project management is going to continue to grow as we get more and more complex in our technologies, and the reshoring of industry in the United States. Construction is going to take off. Any IT infrastructure, communications infrastructure, these are areas that are going to experience extreme growth. And some other tips and tricks and other stats. And I have one last page. So organizations that undervalue project management, they're going to fail quite often. And I encourage you to go ahead and take a look at these, because being forewarned is forearmed. If you find out the typical reasons that projects fail, you can avoid those things and at least point them out to your stakeholders. And that is the summit. Now I like to do a Q&A session. If you have any questions about my experience with City or any of my other experience, or tips and tricks for scheduling, there is an extreme difference between the PMI PMI and the real world. PMI is best of breed, best practices. Then there's the real world with real people in them. So I'm open to any questions.
Yeah, and also any problems you may be facing as we speak. For example, one of the things, Jerry, I have always faced in my project management career is the project schedule gets done very nicely. It feels foolproof, and we spend a lot of time estimating, and we come to the project plan.
Mhm.
But the most difficulty I have seen is to maintain that schedule. So any thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, so the PM can only report the data that he's able to get from the teams. If you don't get information from your teams, the information you're going to provide to your steering committee and your stakeholders is going to be incorrect. And then at some point that will bite you. So getting the correct information is vital. And how I found it to be necessary at Citibank was that I had to build those relationships however I needed to do it. Being as most of my resources were overseas, or and I had zero travel budget, and that was also something I called out as a risk. It's like, if I can't go and talk to these people and build these relationships, at least occasionally, and have a meeting with everybody involved, at least region by region by region, then it was an even heavier lift. But again, they had a different mind about that. So one of the interesting things about the schedule that was handed to me by Deloitte, the program had been running for 2 years, and it had been managed by Ernst & Young. It had been managed by another group within Citi. Then it had been managed by nobody, because that group was taken out of the loop. And then Deloitte managed it for a few months, and then they handed it off to me. So when I say that the schedule that was handed to me didn't make any sense whatsoever, it's because it had been mismanaged very badly. And it was, again, a very heavy lift with a lot of calls, conferences to get it up to speed. And they also insisted that I have everybody's schedule in the portfolio schedule, which I did disagree with. I said, we need to have the milestones. But again, people who don't understand how programs or portfolios are run, they insisted that I have all of these tasks in there, which didn't last very long, because these groups each individually would change their schedules and change their milestones. So the controls were very weak. I think I heard somebody.
Clifford, you had a point?
Yeah, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
You mentioned relationship building, especially with teams. It's very easy to do when you're right next to someone. I mean, you bring the donuts to the meeting, you sync with catering, What are the challenges you face when you're working internationally with teams that are not co-located? How do you develop those relationships? Is there any tips and tricks that you have?
Okay, so time zones is a big challenge. Like I said, I would get up and be on meetings at 6 a.m. our time. One thing that I found that goes a very long way is, I would pick up the pleasantries of whomever I would be talking to. So in Poland, dzień dobry is good day, good afternoon, how are you doing? Now, interestingly, Poland made fun of me because originally I had learned Russian. And in Russian, it's actually dobry dzień, which is reversed. But they also said you have a Russian accent. I said, I'm sorry that I learned Russian first. So I learned Russian when I was at the Alaska school, or excuse me, I was going to University of Alaska Anchorage, and I worked for the Russian American Business Center. So I would have to fax over to Magadan, Khabarovsk, and Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk. And since they only had one phone line, I asked Dimitri, rather than say, do you speak English? I need to send a fax. Dimitri, how do I say, please receive the fax? And so the very first thing I learned to speak in Russian is "Примите факс, пожалуйста," and all that means is please receive the fax. But when they saw that I spoke Russian, say, un moment, and boom, it was done. So I slowly learned to, I picked up Russian. Okay, great. I'm illiterate in Russian. I can say hello, how are you doing? Where's the bathroom, and a beer or vodka? So interestingly, just as a little aside, so Russian is both formal and informal. To say hello is, or hi is привет, and goodbye, you say, oh, okay, I forgot about the formal. So привет or пока. So it's very simple. But I would reach out to these groups and speak their language in Hindi. So shukriya, thank you. Thank you is very important because you're making the effort. Domo arigato, Japanese, Korean, I forget, kasahamnida. So it's the little things that will give you the advantage. And forget the New Yorkers, they're going to be rude. No, I'm making fun of New Yorkers right now. They're very brusque. So, but I can also speak New Yorker. So it's a little thing sometimes that make all the difference. I was speaking to a recruiter yesterday, and I said, shukriya. And she said, oh, and she giggled and thought that was the greatest thing and said, namaste. And, thus ended the phone call. So that and Scotch works really well for a gentleman named Raghu in AML Tech.
Thank you. That's amazing. The whole cultural awareness thing is awesome.
Yeah.
Great one.
Yeah.
I know how to say hello, my pants are on fire in 10 different languages.
Okay.
Just in case my pants are on fire, I want to be able to communicate that.
I can appreciate that. So I also do a smattering of Latin because everything said in Latin sounds much more profound than English. Cognos ergo sum, male in se. See, it sounds profound. Any other questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. Did all of your teams use waterfall to manage the projects? Did they pick their own? They have the flexibility to?
No, it was by vertical.
Other...
So it was by vertical. So okay. AML Tech was waterfall, which in my humble estimation, I very rarely see true waterfall where everything is relatively set in stone with change management along the way for the minor changes. It was the better descriptor is iterative because we would do a replanning almost every month or definitely every quarter to accommodate the changes, the difficulties, the unforeseen. Who was Global Cards Tech was agile. And I think Global Cards business was also trying to be agile, but they were kind of agile. So it was by vertical. And I didn't have any choice in the matter. It was just what they were doing. So I had to accommodate, well, that was funny. Conversation with internal audit. I was on a call with Global Cards Tech, and we were talking about deliverables, and they kept using terms like hope, which I despise. And you never use the word hope when you're talking about a project. We hope we deliver on time. I said, well, either you do or you don't. So find some quantitative meaning me quantitative means to describe yes or no. Hope is not, it's qualitative at best. But I was talking to the reporting internal audit afterwards. I said, did you hear any data in that conversation? So yeah, but why aren't they going to deliver on time? And I repeated myself, did you hear anything quantitative in that conversation? And I said, well, what do you mean? I says, did you hear numbers? Did you hear we've been through this many scripts and we have this many to go? No, they're not going to deliver on time. So it was very difficult to have those conversations. So thank you, Alexandra. Cheers. Any other questions? So if I can leave you with one master bit of advice, be adaptable. Adaptable to your environment, to the people you have to deal with, because you will find people across all spectrums. Some of them will be great. Some of them will be less than great. And I'm trying desperately not to slip into my military acronyms. So.
Jerry, I also, on behalf of the team, I wanted to ask you a question that many a times the project slippage is not an issue of the project manager, but
Rarely
delivered or dependencies have not been met, etc. But the blame comes on the project manager. So how do you tell the team members that, hey, you didn't do this and we are slipping? Or, I mean, you cannot blame them, they're your team, but at the same time, you can't be so nice and, quiet all the time also. So how do you handle that?
Again, I say this is, it would be situational. So at City, there was a lot of that because I had so many people involved and it was very difficult. I would say, my PMs and my program managers, the blame is not on them. If a project manager cannot get the data that he needs, or the data isn't provided, or the data is skewed, because I don't like percent complete for that reason alone. Like if they can't quantify, X number of this or an X number of this to go, if they can't say we were halfway through it, or granted, there's different levels of effort that go into specific kinds of tasks. I always try to get quantitative means to measure, because qualitative is in my mind unacceptable, because that's just setting yourself up to failure. Push as much as you can for quantitative, something with numbers. For instance, we had 145,000 transaction codes that needed to be migrated from the old system into the new big data system. We didn't have anybody in all of Citibank who knew all of them, oddly enough. So they hit a wall. And once they hit that wall, I mean, they progressed very quickly through the first 2/3 of the body of the transaction codes. Then they hit a wall, and then the speed by which they were, migrating them, because they had to be translated correctly, it slowed to a crawl, and that had, of course, cascading impacts throughout the entire program. They didn't tell us. They gave us a quantitative reason, and as it turned out, that quantitative number of 2/3 done didn't translate directly to time. They didn't tell us what their new clearance rate was. So that was the metric we eventually got to, but it required an escalation to their bosses. So, and it is the unfortunate fact that because we are the face of the project program portfolio, we're the first one that they go after. Why did you not see this? And you can tell the seniors all you want that I did not receive the data. Well, you should have seen that. Well, how could I have seen that? So it is a difficult position to be in, and that's why I say the other thing that we need to be is resilient. So yes, we're responsible ultimately. Do we always know what's going on? No, we don't. We do the best we can. You can point out, I had a log of things that were late because this happened so often to me. I say this department didn't do this, and I was able to build up a case after a while to build up a history, and that's how I judged. I use history to judge these people whether or not they could deliver, because I would track their progress, track their ability, in history, and then I said, okay, prove to me. It's not a matter of this is what you're reporting. It was a matter of you prove to me so I can report it to the seniors. Did I answer the question? Because I tried to thread quite a few things through there.
No, I think
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah. I have a question to ask Jerry.
Sure, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, and thank you for the presentation. Yeah, just I would like to know how the PMI principles of project management as good principles, how
Yes.
it is applicable in your physical environment, depending on the experience, working on the different environment worldwide, how people are using the PMI principles and how you found it difficult to manage the project. Is it feasible for entire region, PMI principles and project management? And then the last one, what the difficult situation have you faced in your project management for your career and how you handle it?
Well, I'm talking about the most difficult one in my career. So how I handle it, personal relationships, meeting people where they are, and being adaptable to my circumstance, to the seniors, to the technical teams, to everybody, which, for this one, it involves a cast of thousands. To answer your first question, is it feasible? Is what PMI teaches us as process and procedures feasible? Absolutely. I would consider it. And I think the biggest advantage that it gives you is that it is an established set of communication tools. Say the schedule means this. The risks mean this. And on through the process and procedures. So I see it as extremely valuable as a common understanding of what everybody is doing. And that's the objective, is to everybody's on the same page. So interesting differences. When I moved into the banking world, risk means something completely different to the banks. Risks is risk of exposure to fraud, risk of exposure to money laundering, risk of exposure to this or that or the other thing, reputational risk, risk of being cyber penetrated, risk of this. They view things in those terms, not risk of failure or success. So we did not have that common language, but project management, and at least, I mean, they made a good attempt at creating a common process and procedure. But because there were so many different verticals and so many little fiefdoms, it wasn't completely common. But that is the strength of the PMI and PMP methodologies, bringing a common language. Because I was talking about risk and they're talking about something else, and they confused the snot out of me until I figured out what they were dealing with. So I had to teach them what I meant by risk, and I had to learn by what they meant by risk, because it was very important to them. Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Sometimes you found you are PMI certified or project manager certified, but you working the environment, as Lanka has highlighted. Sometimes you found it's not you have good schedule, you have plan, but the execution and implementation is not a part. So it's really tough in case you have in your team or members some people who don't have that understanding to make things difficult to achieve the project well.
Right. So I have a good example of also another good example about differences in language. I tried desperately for the entire time I was at Citibank to get them to stop saying the schedule was a plan. I could not for the life of me to get them to turn around and says, this is a schedule. This bigger book of work here, this is the plan, communication plan, risk issue. This is the plan, but you're calling this the plan. I go, no, this is the schedule. This has nothing. This doesn't have the the detailed plans for IT. This doesn't have the descriptions of the test cases. This is all of this. They said, no, that's the plan. I go, no, that's not the plan. But I got outvoted. So again, adaptability and resilience. That's the best advice I can pass on to you. I mean, be professional, know the process, and then understand where they are in their maturity for the process.
Thank you.
You bet.
So Jerry, what you're saying is, as project managers, we should also understand, when you said that risk understanding of a PMP or a project manager and a bank is different, you should know that side also when you're talking to them, when you're communicating to them, right? I mean, otherwise you're doing your talking and they're not able to connect to you. They're not able to relate to you.
So I got very specific about addressing risk. I would say project risk. Because, I would say, there's financial risk, there's project risk. So I adapted I incorporated their lexicon into my everyday meetings because we had to address things specifically. So I would specifically call it, this is a project risk rather than just a risk. Because normally I would say this is a risk. And what I meant was this is a project program portfolio risk. And interestingly, they didn't quite understand it. And I think it really hit home when I called out, oddly enough, the same guy I bought the bottle of scotch for, Ragu. I called him out as a single point of failure because he was the only one who knew the technology as well as he was the only one. And he had a heart attack. And I think that was, he's fine. He's fine. We still talk to this day. But that hammered home what I meant by project risk. And unfortunately, that's not the first time it's happened, but fortunately, both of them are okay. But that hammered home what I was trying to state about project risk. Hopefully, you'll never have to deal with that. Anything else? Well, there's 12:30.
Just wanted to do a quick check on the time. People can stay on if you have some questions for Jerry, maybe for a couple of minutes, Jerry, if that is okay with you.
Sure.
But thank you so much, everybody, and for attending. And Jerry, it was like very, very informative, very good session. I request all of you to post it on LinkedIn with at least one learning that you have learned, because it's for our community. It is like the way we can give it back to the people. So any one lesson that you learned or any one input or takeaway from this session, post it on LinkedIn. And again, we'll see you all in the next monthly meeting, the next Lunch and Learn. Any other questions, feel free to directly ask Jerry, or you can post it in the chat box here.
Yeah, I've put my LinkedIn profile down in the chat, so please feel free to reach out. What I find in some LinkedIn advice here, when you connect with somebody, say, hey, it was great meeting you here. So you provide context, because I received invitations from people I have no idea who they are. And then when you go back and say, I'm the head of some corporation, say, hey, Jerry, we met here. It's like, I would really like an opportunity at this company with you. It's oh, hey, I know you. We were there. So it provides context and connection.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank Jerry too. We've been keeping him very busy the last couple of weeks, but I'm glad he's had an opportunity to see a number of the different program events that the programs team is working on, every month, and everybody has enjoyed the talks, I know. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's good to pay back. PMI has done a ton for me. In networking and understanding and, gaining more in my skill sets. So I'm here to help where I can.
Anybody else? Any other comments you want to pass, or you want to ask a question? Feel free. You can directly ask or tell your feedback.
Okay.
Thank you, Jerry.
My pleasure. Glad I could help.
Yeah, definitely. The chat messages are showing, Jerry, that people are very happy with the content that you have delivered in such a short amount of time. Every time you speak, I always feel there is so much more to tap into you, and then time is not just enough. By the time you set the context and then you're getting into the thick of the things, the time is over, and then we have to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, to quote an American president, I feel your pain. Who's old enough to know that one? I see Loretta smiling, so I'm pretty sure she knows who that is. Okay.
Always a pleasure, Jared. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak.
It's good seeing you, Philip. Glad you were able to pass the test. It's a no joke test. You have to study for that thing.
Yeah, it was difficult. So,
yeah. So if you ever want to take on the ACAMs, go for it. It's just as fun.
give me a minute on that.
Maybe next year, right?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe.
All right. All right, Rama.
All right. So thank you, everyone. I think we can close the, okay, let me stop the recording.